I recently acquired this jet mini lathe from a friend of mine last month, and a lathe is something that I've been wanting for a long time, but just never got around to pulling the trigger on. Well, since having this, I can say it's definitely a rabbit hole. It's so much fun to play around with this thing, even if you really aren't just making anything. Yes, you could use it to actually make stuff for projects or make projects on it, but it's just a lot of fun regardless. It's one of the very few tools I can see in a shop, maybe the bandsaw, where you can complete an entire project on it. You can take a small piece of wood and have something functional by the time you're done messing around with it. It's just a blast. So today I'm going to show you a quick and easy project that you can use to just practice with or to actually make something useful. So what I'm making is a simple pine platter, and here's two different examples that I've already made. These are just goofing off, trying to learn the tool, nothing fancy, and at the end of the day I have a useful little project if I wanted to use it as a platter. So these are just goofing off. But I took a single 8-foot long 2x10 and cut it up, avoiding all of the knots, into 7 blanks. So this is a 2x10 is 9 1/4 wide, and I cut them at 9 1/4 long. So I've got these square blanks, and I found center and drew a circle on all of these. 7 of them total. Then I cut a couple of them out on the bandsaw according to my circled line, and then this one I've mounted the face plate for the lathe on what will be the inside of this platter. This tool is a bowl gouge, and hopefully the only tool I'll be using to complete this project. And this has a 3/8 of an inch in diameter shaft, and the flute that runs down this shaft is 1/4 of an inch in diameter. Now, because there's a flute that runs down the middle, or a cut that runs down the middle, that means you have a high side on either side, high point on either side of the flute. And if you hold this tool in such a way to where if you put a line, or let's see, a stick, if you put this stick over both ends of the flute and it's horizontal, then that's basically wide open. That's the cutting edge doing most all the work, and it's hard to control. Now if you rotate this, I'm going to get in the way here, but if you rotate this 90 degrees so that, again, if you put a stick across the top of the flute, it is completely vertical, then that's all the way closed, and no cutting edge is exposed here. You're not going to be doing much cutting. The optimal cutting angle here is 45 degrees, so halfway between open and closed. And at this point, the tip and just a little bit on the forward edge, whichever direction you're using this in, on the forward edge is doing all of your cutting. Now what's cool about a bowl gouge like this is you can grind the tip to different grinds. This is, I believe it's called like an Ellsworth grind. And what we have here is the same cutting edge up here, but also on the wings, the side pieces, if you hold it up against your workpiece, you actually are scraping. So this tool can do double duty, and it's just a very versatile tool that'll do a lot. Now also, the angle here on the back side of the grind, that determines your cutting direction. So if I want to cut across this piece of material here, then I'll have to back it up to an angle to where the back side of the cutting angle is parallel with the face here. Now of course you want to dig in a little bit, so you would rotate, I'm exaggerating, rotate it so that your tool is cutting into the material and then kind of come across like so. Demonstrations are always better than explanations, so let me go ahead and put my face shield on and we'll get started. Now I'm clipping my microphone up here on the face shield, so hopefully it doesn't sound too bad. And every bit of audio that I recorded while the lathe was running is absolutely trash, so I will narrate after the fact. The first step for me is to use the wings of the bowl gouge and make a scraping cut along the bottom side to flatten out the bottom. Now the entire bottom doesn't need to be perfectly flat, just the center section where I will be making the mortise to accept the chuck later on to reverse this thing so I can cut out the center. The rest of it doesn't necessarily need to be flat because it will be cut away when the shaping starts. To determine the size of the mortise, I set these calipers to the size of the jaws on my chuck, and with the lathe spinning, I can touch the left side on a somewhat downward angle to scribe a line, or in this case a circle, And if the other side matches up with the calipers, as you can see here, then that means I have a perfect representation or perfect mark of where I need to cut the mortise. And to cut the mortise, I'm using the bowl gouge like I previously stated, and starting it with somewhat closed and riding the bevel into the material. And then once the bevel is started, or once the cut is started, I can open up the chisel slightly, and the bevel will tell me the direction of cut that I need, or that I'm going to be making rather. And once I have the depth determined, I can rotate around so that the bevel is perpendicular to the axis of rotation and kind of make a little flat spot on the bottom. Once I have the one side of the mortise cut, then I can come the other direction using the bevel again to make a opposite direction cut and create a flat bottom mortise. Now I'll have to repeat this 3 or 4 times in order to get to the depth that I want. I did in this case anyway. I didn't hit it on the first try, but I am trying to go about 3/16 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch for this particular set of jaws that I have for my chuck. When using a hand plane on flat work, you get better results by cutting downhill with the hand plane. It's the same concept as here with this bowl gouge. If I was to cut left to right, that means I'm cutting into the end grain, or uphill, I guess you could say. And that will result in fuzzy fibers, not a super clean cut. Now, if I cut from right to left, then that's like I'm cutting downhill with a hand plane, and that's the appropriate direction that you should be cutting if possible, and that will result in a much smoother finish, which will result in less sanding when it's all said and done. I wasn't exactly sure what shape I wanted to go with here, so I just kind of made it up as I went along. And that's one of the cool things about a lathe. If you're not working off a template and you don't really like the shape, then just change it. So I started by removing the outside corner on the bottom, and then that progressed into basically a single concave curve. The last thing before switching over to the chuck is sanding. And I just went to 220 with this, didn't go crazy with it. Started it with 180, I think, and then went to 220. And to switch over to the chuck, to cut the inside of the platter, it can be removed from the faceplate. Then the chuck can be mounted into the lathe, and then the material or the project can be mounted onto the chuck. And one thing that's very helpful before you start removing material on the inside is to use a drill bit to drill down and establish your final depth. That way you know once you get to the bottom of your drilled out hole that you've gone far enough and you shouldn't go any deeper. I don't know why, but I forgot to do that in this case, but that's okay because this project is relatively thin. So I wasn't going to be removing a ton of material, and I just measured as I went, being careful not to go too far. Now, in this case, I am wanting to go downhill to make the cut as nice as possible, which in the inside of this platter is the opposite of the outside. So from left to right is my downward direction. And all these cuts are just the same as they were on the outside. Going into the material just a little bit to establish my depth of cut, and then rotating around to establish the shape or the curve, and then finally making a flat bottom by pushing the material, or pushing the gouge in a perpendicular to the axis of rotation direction. And that'll just remove all of the bottom material. And in this case, I left a little bit of extra stuff at the bottom, but that's easily removed just by pushing into the chuck with your cut. Now on my final shaping cuts, I wasn't exactly smooth or consistent with my cutting, so I left a couple ridges and bumps here and there. So to clean all those up, I ended up just spinning the bowl gouge around and using the wings on a pole cut, and this will kind of scrape the bottom and scrape all those little bumps away. Now, it's very possible to get a nice smooth cut without scraping and going in the forward direction with the bowl gouge. However, I just couldn't get it done in this particular situation. Once I was satisfied with the interior shape, the outside just looked a little thick and chunky, so I reduced its thickness by using the bowl gouge wing in a scraping motion, and then finally the project is finished off by sanding. Again, going from 180 just to 220 in this instance. Now, of course, you can apply a finish while it's on the lathe. That might be easier in some instances, but for this one, I'm not going to apply a finish. It's just a little fun test project and experiment. Just basically having fun. So this isn't really about making a platter or how to use a bowl gouge or whatever. Basically, if you were on the fence of wanting to get a lathe and just haven't pulled the trigger yet, I encourage you to do so. It's so much fun messing around with one of these things. And like I said earlier, it's one of those tools that you can just walk up to, start cutting up some wood, and have a finished project in just a little bit of time. You can't really do that with one specific other tool in the shop, maybe the bandsaw, but like the table saw or any other power tool, you're just completing a process. This, you can do the entire project in one area. It's very satisfying, very rewarding, and you can make some really nice stuff. This is just goofing off. It is a functional little platter. But it is just, like I said, goofing off. Anyway, hopefully you found this video useful in some way or another. If you want a lathe, I encourage you to go ahead and get one. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for watching. You guys take care and have a great day.